is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie O.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Politicians and protesters gather in England. Vaccines, girls' education and climate top the agenda as G7 leaders meet in Cornwall.
Our other headlines: getaways get the go-ahead as summer travel restrictions are relaxed across Europe.
An expensive but greener transport alternative. Carbon-neutral cargo takes to the skies.
And kick down the road, Europe's biggest football tournament finally gets underway a year later than expected.
Girls' education, vaccines and climate are top of the agenda as G7 leaders meet face-to-face for the first time in 2 years in the English county of Cornwall.
Their host, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, says the summit is a chance for the countries to orchestrate a united recovery from the pandemic. Well, our correspondent Naweed Jabarkal is in Cornwall. Naweed, big announcement in the last hour on girls' education. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right, Jamie. Boris Johnson making this announcement, $607 million, that's £430 million, dedicated to help girls' education around the world. Boris Johnson says he wants every child to be able to go to school around the world, and this money specifically will go to the Global Fund for Education, which is an international charity working in 76 different countries. More broadly, the coronavirus has brought this into sharp focus for the G7 and indeed other countries at its height, at the height of the pandemic. 1.6 billion children around the world were out of school, and just in terms of the impact that education has, according to the UK government, a child whose mother knows how to read is twice as likely to go to school and 50% more likely to be immunised. So there is the wider shadow of COVID-19 hanging over this decision. Looking ahead to next month, the Global Education Summit takes place in London, another event that the UK is co-hosting with Kenya. There, Boris Johnson wants to go even further and wants $5 billion pledged to try and get more children into school. Jamie.
Girls' education aside, what else are leaders hoping to achieve?
Well, it's the two C's, really, which are dominating here. COVID-19, unsurprisingly, and vaccinating more people around the world. We've seen in Western countries, in some of these 7 nations, in particular wealthier nations, they've been able to rapidly roll out a lot of immunizations and vaccinations, but the rest of the world is lagging behind. President Joe Biden, before he arrived here in the UK, said the US will donate $500 million spare vaccines. The UK says it's going to add 100 million more to that, and Boris Johnson, we expect, will call on G7 leaders to try and up that number in the next few days. So watch out for that. There could be more announcements around further vaccinations, but crucially, the timing of those vaccinations is important as well. We've heard from Seth Berkley, the head of Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, in the last half an hour or so, who says that it needs to be now, not in a year's time, which is when Boris Johnson wants the whole world to be vaccinated by the end of 2022. That's a concern shared by the World Health Organization as well. Its special envoy on COVID-19 saying that, David Nabarro, saying that this shouldn't become an issue of charity, of rich countries sharing this with poorer nations in terms of charity. He said this is something that really the whole world will benefit from if these vaccines are shared straight away to try and bring the pandemic under control. Aside from that, climate change, the other major issue. We're here on the one of the most southerly tips of the United Kingdom. President Joe Biden's made it one of his key pledges. So has Boris Johnson as he gets ready to for the UK to host the COP26 UN Climate Summit later this year. So there could be more to come out in the coming days, particularly around financing climate, because the rhetoric's been around for lots of years, but how do you really get down to paying for environmentally friendly policies? So that's something that I think will come out in the next few days. And then just lastly, if you pull out a bit, perhaps viewers have seen some of the images coming out of it. It's been pretty jovial. The weather's just turned overcast, but it's been sunny at times today. The leaders have been sitting together together, some of them having a drink last night. Joe Biden was seen with his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, at a local restaurant. It's been a pretty positive mood, and that's in stark contrast to the Trump era, who President Trump didn't really like these sorts of events. So this is very much about foreign policy as well, and trying to put on a united front for multilateralism. Joe Biden saying that America is back. That's something that he's been trying to promote, and he did meet Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President, in the last hour or so, and she tweeted to say that they discussed COVID-19, climate change, and dealing with China, was a direct quote that she said. So I think this is more about trying to put on that united front to say that multilateralism and the idea of working together rather than transactionally with different nations, that's something that these nations want to try and promote.
Naweed, it looks very peaceful where you are. What about all these protesters?
Yeah, peaceful because there's a big security presence here, really. Just in front of me, you can see behind the small coastline on the town of St. Ives, just ahead of me, about 50 metres, is a big ring of steel around where President Joe Biden is staying, 10-foot-high steel barricades. Pretty brutalist infrastructure, if you will, big boulders every 5 or 10 metres, and on the other side, police officers every 10 metres. So make no mistake, 6,500 security personnel making sure that it looks peaceful and quiet behind me. That's in terms of how many officers are on the streets here and behind the scenes. And it's not without reason. Some would argue 7 arrests earlier today, about 3 miles away from here, after 2 cars were found with the police having suspicious concerns about 2 vehicles within the perimeter. About an hour away in Falmouth, another part of Cornwall, there was a bomb hoax earlier this week which saw a hotel have to be evacuated. So there are concerns around security, but in terms of protests, about 150, 200 protesters from Extinction Rebellion here earlier today. That's an international climate movement. So there are protests planned all across Cornwall, but in reality, the security is very tight here, as you'd expect, with some of the most famous world leaders on show. Jamie.
Naweed Jabarkal in Cornwall, thank you very much.
And as Naweed was telling us there, climate change protesters have been kept well away from the world leaders meeting in St. Ives. Nonetheless, many have gathered in fields around the Cornish town. They're demonstrating over what they say is the failure of G7 nations to respect the 2015 Paris climate goals. CGTN has been speaking to them, and to hear their message, go to our website at europe.cgtn.com.
Well, as we've been reporting, US President Biden's visit to the UK has so far been relatively modest compared to his predecessor, Donald Trump.
Nathan King reports on how the current White House is trying to rekindle old alliances with a more traditional approach to diplomacy.
There were no floating baby Biden balloons in the United Kingdom to welcome the new American president, and it's unlikely that President Biden will push another world leader aside to get to the front of the pack at the NATO meeting in Brussels. And it's improbable you'll see a group photo like this from the G7 summit in Cornwall. In the US president's own words, the United States is back, and multilateralism is too, and the focus is on Russia and China.
Strengthening the alliance, make it clear to Putin and to China that Europe and the United States are tight, and the G7 is going to move.
And earlier this week, US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan laid out the US wish list from Europe.
At the G7, he will join with his fellow leaders to lay out a plan to end the COVID-19 pandemic with further specific commitments towards that end. He will also join his fellow leaders to announce a new initiative to provide financing for physical, digital, and health infrastructure in the developing world, a high-standard, climate-friendly, transparent, and rules-based alternative to what China is offering.
The US Senate just voted with a 2/3 majority to pump $250 billion over 5 years into the industries of tomorrow, like electric cars, 5G and 6G telecommunications, and has a plan to move supply chains for semiconductors and other vital technologies away from China. In this effort, it wants Europe and the UK's help. It also wants the EU and others to pressure China over Taiwan, Hong Kong and Xinjiang. Not all European leaders are on board with Biden's Asia and China policies. Germany thinks the approach is too aggressive. Southern and Eastern Europe, long feeling left out by Brussels, have been keen to work with Beijing on investment and development. Biden and his UK hosts also have deep differences on the fallout from Brexit, whether it be the increased tensions in Northern Ireland or differences over trade and aid, tariffs and, of course, the future of the World Trade Organization.
We want to make a decisive progress to resolve our bilateral disputes on aircraft and the US Section 232 measures on steel and aluminium. On the latter, we send a clear signal to the US on our willingness to solve this issue in a fair and balanced way by suspending the automatic doubling of our legitimate countermeasures. It is now for the US to walk the talk.
While Washington may have rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, the Iran nuclear deal has not yet been revived. And Washington's pro-Israel stance in the recent bombing of Gaza upset many nations who have more pro-Palestinian leanings. Then there's the US pullout from Afghanistan, and also fears that even though the US says it's back on the world stage, all that could change very quickly, given the state of US domestic politics. The US also wants to announce this week in Europe a new development fund funded by the Western democracies, a competitor, if you like, to China's Belt and Road Initiative. But here at home, a big infrastructure bill is going nowhere fast. Talks have just collapsed again with congressional leaders. There is a growing feeling in Europe among analysts, politicians and others, as well as the rest of the world, that the US needs to get its own house in order before it can reclaim leadership of the rest of the world. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
So a focus on European alliances at this summit and beyond. But talks between European leaders and the US president have more ground to cover. Peter Klepper is editor-in-chief of the news and analysis website Brussels Report, and we can speak to him now live. Thanks very much indeed for joining us today. So what are the priorities for the EU in this first real meeting with President Biden? What will European leaders want to discuss?
Well, there's so many things. There's, of course, the issue of the TRIPS waiver, so basically scrapping patents for COVID vaccines. Then there's the sort of the strengthening of the military bonds between the United States and its Western partners. There's the minimum tax, the global minimum tax that President Biden is pushing for, and that European countries, including the UK, are officially in favor of, but in practice are actually much more wary about. And there's a whole range of other issues that no doubt will be discussed. But I think the main point of this meeting is to get to know each other. For Biden, it's important to stress that Trump is gone and he wants to return to multilateralism and diplomacy. And for European countries, this is sort of the first opportunity to address President Biden.
So a chance to build relationships then, but is there likely to be any real progress, any concrete steps made?
Oh, well, perhaps on the development fund that was mentioned, because the host is the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and he wants to decide this big fund that would supposedly help countries across the globe to achieve climate targets. Now, even in the United Kingdom, there is some in the UK government. There is some resistance to that. The Treasury is not happy to put up the funds just now like that right away. It at least wants to wait until fall to do that. And of course, fundamentally, the question is whether it's actually a good idea to go on a global spending spree to prop up certain forms of energy that in practice are not necessarily always so good for the environment as they have been sold to be. But that's, of course, another question.
OK, Peter Klepper from the Brussels Report, thanks very much indeed for being with us on the programme today.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, from Russia with love, but some reservations too. Not everyone is happy to see their gas piped to Europe.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
The final hurdles have been cleared in the fight to resume normal travel across Europe this summer. EU ambassadors have signed off on a plan to relax travel restrictions and broaden that list of EU countries that are safe for travel. Let's talk to our correspondent Tony Waterman in Brussels. Tony, how is this going to work?
Well, Jamie, for European citizens who are either fully vaccinated or have recovered from COVID, they're going to be able to skip quarantine and testing. So they should have a fairly easy time jet-setting across Europe this summer if they so choose. But other travelers may not be so lucky. They could still be subject to restrictions depending on the COVID situation in the country that they are traveling from. These EU member states have also agreed to standardize some of the metrics, which right now are quite confusing because it's a patchwork across the bloc. So when it comes to fully vaccinated, that is going to mean somebody who has received their last dose at least 14 days ago. PCR tests are going to be valid for 72 hours, while those rapid antigen tests are going to be valid for 48 hours. And it's this agreement, along with the EU digital COVID certificate, which also received the green light today from the European Council. Put those two together, and Brussels sees this as a winning combination to reopen Europe to travel this summer. Take a listen.
Tony, you described Europe as a bit of a patchwork across Europe. Certainly vaccination has been a bit of a patchwork. Are all member states really going to be ready to roll this out at the same time?
Well, in fact, some of them are already doing some of these things. So travelers to Greece, for instance, that are fully vaccinated, they have not had to quarantine for weeks now. This is really about coordination and returning to the free movement of people. So that is an option, although, of course, this is a recommendation. And even though I agreed to it, it is not legally binding. So there could be some picking and choosing, although not many economies right now want to make money-spending tourists jump through hoops to arrive at their shores. What is legally legally binding, though, are those EU digital certificates. And come July 1st, every single member state is going to have to start issuing them and start accepting them. 10 of them already are doing that because they want to get the economies up and running. And this comes against the backdrop of vaccination rates that are climbing. More than a quarter of the EU population right now has now been fully vaccinated. So while these programs are available for EU citizens, they're not available necessarily for third-party countries. They're trying to expand that this summer.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you very much.
As Europe opens itself up to travel, Britain and the United States could be about to do the same by setting up a travel corridor between the two countries. But British health officials are calling for a delay to the further lifting of COVID restrictions amid a resurgence in the rate of infection. Nicole Johnston reports.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and US President Joe Biden have discussed the possibility of restarting transatlantic travel for business and tourism. The airline industry says that this is essential for economic recovery after the pandemic. So for more than a year, most British citizens have been banned from entering the US. Americans can travel to the UK, but they have to quarantine for 10 days. And there's growing pressure from the airline industry to open a travel corridor between these two countries because the British economy is losing $33 million every day because of its closure. However, UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab says there are no immediate signs that this will happen anytime soon. And on the vaccines front, the UK Vaccines Minister Nadhim Zahawi says that everyone aged over 50 will have been offered 2 doses of the vaccine by the 21st of June. That's the date when the British government hoped to lift all COVID-19 restrictions and social distancing. Now it appears it could be delayed by 2 to 4 weeks, and that's because of the Delta variant. It's spreading across the UK, it's responsible for more than 90% of new infections, and it's 60% more transmissible than the variant which was first identified in the UK.
You look at the past week, the increase in cases is 63%. Now, the good news is that vaccines are beginning to sever that link between infections, case rates, and hospitalisation. Hospitalisation only rose by 7%, and sadly, death also rose, but by only 1.9%.
The British government is planning to announce on Monday whether it will fully reopen the economy or delay it. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Moving cargo around the world by sea and by air is polluting, but the upside, of course, is speed. Now, a carbon-neutral air link has opened between Frankfurt and Shanghai, and the technology behind it could be the future of aviation. Ryan Thompson reports.
Flying high above the clouds, this flight to Shanghai is like no other. It's carrying nearly 100 tons of cargo, but unlike other air freighters, which come with a costly environmental price tag, this plane is doing it sustainably.
This is one of the world's first attempts at carbon-neutral flying. It looks and sounds like any other cargo flight. Goods are being loaded, but in just over an hour when it finally takes off, it will be emissions-free, powered by sustainable aviation fuel.
It's an expensive but greener alternative to traditional jet fuel. In this case, it's made from bio-waste, like leftover cooking oil. Aki Martinka has led efforts to bring it to Lufthansa Cargo.
It's really something which has been produced just a few days or a few weeks ago, which has grown as a plant, as a vegetables, taking the CO2 from the atmosphere just a few days ago, and now putting it here on the aircraft, it goes back into the atmosphere.
Unlike other fossil fuel alternatives, sustainable aviation fuel requires no modifications for planes to be able to fly with it. Lufthansa's dedicated Boeing 777 can fill up with regular fuel or a sustainable source if the airport offers it. But there's a reason all the world's airlines aren't rushing to use sustainable fuel. Supply is limited, and the cost can be 3 to 5 times higher.
We need much more producers because the more production we have, the better will be the price at the end. I guess there will be a competition then, and we would have also a more reasonable price for the sustainable aviation fuel.
Tougher rules on emissions from flying have sent researchers looking for other sources for sustainable aviation. I visited one lab outside Frankfurt where a new method, known as power-to-liquid, could produce jet fuel out of thin air.
You grab the CO2, which there is, ideally grab it out of the air, and combine it with hydrogen, which you get by electrolyzing water. It certainly could meet all the aviation needs. The crucial factor here will be renewable electricity.
But power-to-liquid still remains largely a lab experiment. There could eventually be enough of it to power all of today's flights. But that is not expected for many, many years. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
The UK economy grew for the third month in a row in April as lockdowns eased. Demand for new cars, caravans and motorhomes helped push GDP up by 2.3%. Spending also rose sharply in the hospitality sector. It's the fastest rate of growth since July last year.
South Africa's government has sold a 51% stake in South African Airways to Qatarso Consortium. The consortium has committed to more than $221 million to fund the struggling airline. South African Airways has been under bankruptcy protection since December 2019, and its business declined substantially during the pandemic.
2 people on board a cruise liner have tested positive for coronavirus, despite passengers and crew having been vaccinated and tested before the voyage. The Celebrity Millennium set sail on Saturday for a 7-day cruise of the Caribbean. The company says both passengers are asymptomatic and in isolation.
And is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's an electric flying taxi in Los Angeles, made by US startup Archer Aviation and backed by United Airlines. It can take off and land vertically, but flies like a plane. The company hopes to launch it commercially in 2024 with the aim of shuttling commuters to and from Los Angeles Airport.
China's ride-hailing firm Didi has filed to go public in the United States in what could be one of the largest public offerings this year. The company, backed by technology giants Alibaba and Tencent, has not revealed the size of the offering. The listing comes as ride-hailing is making a comeback, largely due to vaccines and a drop in COVID cases. Well, let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett, who is following developments in New York. Hello to you, John. So it sounds like Didi could be a big deal.
Yes, indeedy. I've waited 19 hours to say that to you. We broke this story on the American version of your show about 19 hours ago. It just came out then. And we were first with it, which is very good news for us. I mean, this is a big deal because this is a big company. It's the dominant ride-hailing company in China. But beyond that, they also operate in places like Japan and Australia and Russia and all over South America as well. They have about 550 million users worldwide, and the revenue for Didi in the first quarter of this year was around $6 billion, and that's about twice the amount that Uber managed to bring in over the same period. Now then, it's funny when these things happen, you learn stuff that you didn't really know. I did not know this, I admit that. Didi is backed by SoftBank. Actually, there should be no surprise there because they back a lot of Chinese companies, Japan lender. Also Tencent, as you said, the internet platform company. Alibaba's in there as well, and so too is Uber itself. They bought a slice, very sensibly, I think, as well. This is going to be a full-on IPO, Robin. We're going to have all the razzmatazz that goes with it. This is not a SPAC or a direct listing. There's going to be a roadshow, the whole works. And it's being pushed along, chaperoned by Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan Chase. And I know what you said in the intro there. I thought, I read somewhere that they wanted to try and make it into a $100 billion company. That's what they're seeking to get out of this IPO, $100 billion company. So it's going to be big, whichever way you look at it, and certainly one of the biggest, if not the biggest, here in New York this year. The only outstanding question, Robin, is where it's going to happen. Will it be here at the New York Stock Exchange, known locally as the NYSE, or will it be at the National Association of Securities Dealers Automated Quotations, better known as NASDAQ? Robin.
But, John, how will this go down in this China skeptic era in the States?
Well, I know. It's ironical, isn't it, really? It really is, because here we have Didi coming to New York as an ADR. That's what they trade here as, these Chinese companies. And yet we've got Joe Biden increasing to 59 now, not decreasing or scrapping at all, increasing to 59 the number of Chinese corporations and companies that Americans are no longer allowed to invest in. We've got those ADRs, American Depository Receipts, which have been delisted from here at the stock exchange and also at the NASDAQ. We've got the full-on U.S. Innovation Competition Act now working its way through the House of Representatives. It cleared the Senate earlier this week with $250 billion, which is actually not that much. But anyway, it has a little bit of money behind it. It's very broad-ranging anti-China legislation. And then on top of that, you've got SoftBank in there as a backer, and SoftBank has already been sanctioned by the U.S. authorities here. They also own a bit of ByteDance, which of course is TikTok. So that in itself is controversial. So what's good about this? Well, I think Didi is seen not as a Chinese company. Not that that's a bad thing, but you know what I'm saying right now. It's seen much more as an international company. I think Uber is in there as a backer, and I think people are rather fond of Uber, certainly in the United States, generally speaking. So I think that will help. And then you've got the whole issue of ride-sharing and deliveries by car, now that we're coming out of the pandemic. And generally speaking, I think that's seen as a growth area. So Robin and Jamie, we're looking for this big IPO sometime in the next 2 months.
John, thank you very much indeed. John Terrett there in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, don't watch the rest of the show if you're scared of mice, because Australia is seeing one of its worst plagues for years.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination programme offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, Ricky, last clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy idea.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Vaccines, girls' education and climate top the agenda as G7 leaders meet in England.
And getaways get the go-ahead. Summer travel restrictions are relaxed across Europe. Engineers have started preparations to pump natural gas into Russia's Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The rather controversial project will carry gas from Russia to Germany and is said to be around 95% complete. Ashutosh Shastri is an expert in the energy sector. I asked him how significant this milestone is.
Well, the milestone really is that the above water tie-in today has been completed. And what this means is that, it's an important part of the pre-commissioning work, and then a whole lot of other testing that is required for the final gas flows to then start to happen can now go ahead. So apart from the operational aspect of it, I think the gas deliveries are now within sight. And that is a very significant takeaway for the day for me today, that after a lot of uncertainty, being sanctioned and unsanctioned, or not knowing whether it was sanctioned or not sanctioned, it is now going ahead. And I think that is the fantastic piece of news for Germany and for Europe.
Going ahead it might be, but it is worth saying that still not everyone is happy about this.
Indeed. In fact, if I might actually draw your attention to just a day ago, Greta Thunberg tweeted that, victory over the cancellation of Keystone Pipeline in the US has been attained. Now, you can easily imagine commentary in the US saying that, this is this administration which does not care about American jobs, but, has gone ahead and, finally given the go-ahead for the pipeline in Russia to go ahead. So it can create all sorts of political debate, disagreement. So, but, it is on the political side. I think, these things will continue to happen. Even the Keystone Pipeline should be seen in the larger context, I think, of the other U.S. pipelines. I think it is a dawning reality now that energy security is as important, if not more important, than wider pipeline politics. This is now looking towards the last few meters of the race. I think this is now well within sight.
And in terms of the entire European energy mix, how significant and important is Nord Stream 2?
Well, it is. First of all, it has to be borne in mind that the Nord Stream 2 investment is a private sector investment, a foreign direct investment in European infrastructure. So, if Europe, which now needs to renew its infrastructure for its decarbonization and its energy security, is going to require more energy investments. The fact that Nord Stream investment would have failed in Europe as a private sector investment would have been pretty damning news, to be honest with you. So that's the point number one. The second point really is that this is a very important pipeline first for Germany. I mean, Germany is well supplied with pipelines. It is not the only international pipeline coming into Germany, but it is really a very important pipeline for Germany, because Germany now has a very clear plan to wean away from coal. And, this gas is going to be a very important source of fuel, not only for Germany as it begins to transition away from its coal. It aims to have zero coal on its system by 2045. So which means, Germany has to shut down about 3,000 megawatts of coal plant every year from now until 2045.
The French foreign minister is visiting Burkina Faso in a show of support after 130 people were killed in terror attacks. He will also be explaining France's decision to reduce its military presence in the region, despite the unstable security situation. Ross Cullen reports.
The Sahel region of Africa, a vast, loosely governed area of the southern Sahara Desert. Fighting broke out there in 2012 when extremist armed groups captured swathes of territory in northern Mali. Thousands of soldiers and civilians have died, and more than 2 million people have been displaced since the conflict began. French troops have been trying to push the rebels back since 2014, and that mission is now ending.
The desired result is obviously to reduce our multiple points of contact and to reduce external operations. We will continue the fight against terrorism with special forces, obviously with a strong French component with several hundred soldiers and African, European and international forces at our side, but with a will to carry out strictly counter-terrorism interventions.
More than 5,000 French soldiers are deployed across the 5 countries in the G5 Sahel group. working with the local forces in Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger and Chad. The French president did not mince his words in his official statement. He said that France could not secure some areas in the Sahel that will then just fall back into instability because regional partners decide not to fulfill their responsibilities. French troops will not pull out entirely, and some will remain to operate as part of broader international efforts in the region. Some opposition MPs in France are demanding a debate on the move, and the government will, at the very least, have to officially table its plan in Parliament. Regional political turmoil has also concerned France. In May, Mali suffered a second military coup in 9 months. And France's longtime ally, Idriss Déby, the former president of Chad, died in office in April from wounds sustained on the battlefield. The Sahel announcement coincided with the French foreign minister's visit to West Africa. The former colonial power has claimed some success against militants in recent months. But the situation remains fragile, France has grown frustrated, and the end of its major military mission in the Sahel is the outcome. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
More than 350,000 people in Ethiopia's war-torn Tigray region are suffering famine conditions, and millions more are at risk from a man-made crisis. The United Nations says it's the worst food crisis anywhere in the world in a decade. Ethiopia and Eritrea are both fighting rebels in the region. 2 million people have been displaced, abandoning their crops and livestock.
20 people are thought to have been killed and over 40 injured in a bus crash in Pakistan. The bus was carrying pilgrims from a religious festival in the remote Balochistan province when it veered off the road and fell into a ravine.
A court in France has ordered a man who slapped President Macron to serve 4 months in prison. Damien Tarrell attacked Macron as he met members of the public in southeast France earlier this week. Macron has called the attack an isolated incident.
A court in the French city of Toulon is due to rule on whether compensation should be paid to women who received faulty breast implants. The implants were wrongly approved for use by a German safety certifier. In a separate case on Thursday, a court in Paris ordered the firm TUV Rhineland to pay damages. Many of the implants ruptured after surgery, causing serious health problems.
Lebanon is suffering severe fuel shortages as its economic crisis appears to be worsening. Analysts say the financial turmoil is rooted in decades of political corruption. This current crisis is thought to pose the biggest threat to stability since the country's civil war in the 1970s.
34 McDonald's stores in Indonesia have reopened after too many people tried to get their hands on a K-pop branded special meal. The temporary shutdown came after the meal, chosen by South Korean boy band BTS, sparked a buying frenzy. It was only available on delivery, causing huge queues of delivery drivers.
Now, farmers in Australia are battling one of the worst mouse plagues in decades. The rodents have destroyed countless crops across 3 states. Our correspondent Greg Navarro reports.
No matter how bad what's about to happen may seem, Norman Morris says there were even more mice on his farm just a couple of weeks ago.
You couldn't put a pin between them. The ground was just shaking like that, moving with mice.
The mouse plague that spread across 3 states is costing farmers millions, if not billions of dollars in lost crops and feed for stock. For Morris, it comes on the heels of a devastating drought.
You're nearly down on your knees and praying for rain, then it did rain. And we got up and into the crops, sowed them, looking real good, ready to harvest, and then little mice sort of poke their heads up and say, I'm going to help you too.
Mouse plagues tend to happen here every 10 years, but this one appears to be a lot worse. The mice have destroyed or contaminated countless crops and feed for livestock.
I reckon without labour and all that, we've probably lost about $120,000 to $130,000 worth of hay and grain.
Much of Morris's day is spent spreading tens of thousands of dollars worth of mouse bait across his property and emptying traps. In some cases, farmers say, it's almost like the mice are actually following seeders, waiting for those grains to be put into the ground. Those grains that they don't get to during the day will come back for at night. And the impact isn't just confined to farms. Mice ripped through most of the items here that weren't stored in plastic containers, even disposable diapers.
We have lost maybe over 50 to 60 grand of stock.
All of this has taken an emotional toll as well.
They're hungry, they'll eat it.
Morris is hoping for a cold, wet winter to help reduce mouse numbers. Otherwise, he believes, as bad as this seems, things could get much worse again during the spring breeding season. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Gilgandra.
China's foreign minister has called for a coordinated global reduction in nuclear weapons stockpiles. Wang Yi was addressing the conference on disarmament in Geneva. He said the international community should uphold multilateralism in promoting arms control, disarmament and non-proliferation.
Meanwhile, China's senior diplomat, Yang Jiechi, has expressed concern at the spread of the COVID lab leak theory during a call with the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He called on the U.S. to focus its efforts on international cooperation in fighting the pandemic and said the two countries should work together to get relations back on track.
You're watching CGTN Europe. Still ahead. Selfies from another world. China's rover takes its own picture on the surface of Mars.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Now, as selfies go, this must be up there with the best. China has released 4 high-definition colour images taken from the surface of Mars.
The country's Zhurong rover touched down on the red planet last month, and officials say it's in good shape. Sun Ye reports.
New images from China's Mars mission taken hundreds of millions of kilometers away from Earth. 3 were taken by Zhurong and another was taken off the rover and its landing platform. Zoom in close enough and there is an image of the 2022 Olympic Games mascots. The mission's chief designer says they included this to show the higher, faster and stronger Olympic spirit shared by the Mars mission.
可以告诉大家，我们火星车上的状况非常健康。
Zhurong is very healthy, and it's been steadily making its way to its designated targets every day. Since the touchdown on May 15th, the rover has been checking its own condition out, as well as that of its surroundings. It's moved some 80 meters up till now.
等等等等。
Zhurong has been working on the red planet for 28 Martian days as of Friday and will continue to work there for at least another 2 months. China's Mars mission has been sending back more than just high-resolution pictures, and more of its findings will be made public soon. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
And CGTN.com has all the week's top stories from China. Let's take a look.
that and more at CGTN.com.
The chairman of Inter Milan says the European Super League fiasco has highlighted an urgent need for change in how the sport is run. The Italian club backed the breakaway competition, but it collapsed after pressure from football fans across Europe.
Speaking to CGTN's Stephen Cole, Stephen Jung said clubs must work closely with football associations to improve the way they work.
I think overall, this whole incident shows that we have to working with FIFA and UEFA to really improving the quality of the games, to understand what other changes we need in the market, and to listen to the fans and understand what other things that will be providing a better experience for the fans. But pandemic and the COVID situation really pushed us to see, these changes or innovations are needed in the market. Doesn't matter what kind of format, doesn't matter in what kind of ways, but eventually understanding, the market, understanding the current situation after COVID, and really making sure we're able and be brave to adapt to the changes, and changing the whole football system and improving the system is needed.
And you can see more of that interview in The Agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
It's a year late, but Europe's biggest football tournament kicks off in just a few hours, with Italy and Turkey going head-to-head at Rome's Olympic Stadium. 11 cities across the continent will host 51 matches, all under strict COVID safety conditions. Let's talk to our correspondent Rahul Pathak. So COVID-19 still affecting team preparations this week, but after waiting for a year, football fans must be happy that Euro 2020 is now finally underway.
Absolutely. Well, not finally. I mean, it's about to be underway in about 2 hours' time as Italy, as you say, take on Turkey at the Stadio Olimpico. I think the fans are very, very happy, of course. I think the organisers are kind of more relieved because we actually did a report at the end of last year for CGTN looking ahead to the Euros. And at that stage, the idea of holding a tournament, as you say, being played across 11 cities right across Europe in front of fans seemed like an absolutely crazy notion. Yet 6 months later, here we are, 2 hours away from kick-off on what will be the largest sporting event in front of fans to take place since the pandemic. Here's my report.
Euro 2020, a tournament delayed by a year because of the pandemic, will finally get underway this Friday at the Stadio Olimpico in Rome. The 24-team event will be played at 11 venues across the continent and is by far the biggest sporting competition to take place since the start of the pandemic. Ahead of Friday's kick-off, the coronavirus has already affected the preparations of several teams, including one of the favourites, Spain. After 2 players tested positive for COVID-19, the Spanish government decided to vaccinate the entire squad, as they did with Spain's Olympic teams ahead of the Tokyo Games next month.
As I said, the conditions will be the same as for the Olympians, so they'll be given the Pfizer vaccine. We're using the same ethical criteria that we've used to vaccinate our Olympians, so that they compete in the best conditions as they represent Spain.
Critics say the problems faced by the Spanish team is an inevitable consequence of holding a tournament amid a global pandemic. However, European football's governing body UEFA insist they've taken steps to ensure that Euro 2020 will be a success on and off the pitch.
So I'm standing outside Spanish team headquarters, and in an effort to reduce the impact of any future COVID-19 outbreaks, UEFA have allowed Spain and all the other teams to increase their squad sizes from 23 players to 26. This is to ensure that teams have enough depth to fulfil all their matches, even if players test positive for coronavirus.
As well as the players, there is the issue of fan safety. All venues have committed to hosting a reduced number of spectators within the stadiums, the hope being that the tournament doesn't become a COVID super spreader event.
Creo que sin problemas y con precauciones. Siempre que haya I don't see any problems if we have measures in place, if we always have those protocols. For each ticket holder, if they present to UEFA an antigen test, a COVID test before they enter the stadium, also if there's an open space too, I don't see any problems.
One thing that isn't in doubt is the anticipation for this tournament. After a year of lockdowns and people's lives being turned upside down, Euro 2020 will be starting a year late. But for fans and players alike, it's better late than never.
So, Rahul, COVID obviously means that things are looking a little different, but what would a successful tournament look like under current conditions?
Well, in many ways, the scale of this tournament, it's rather unusual format. The fact that it's being played across 11 cities right across the continent in front of fans makes these Euros a perfect test case to see whether these protocols, these strict protocols that UEFA have in place, can stand up to the most extreme scrutiny. And of course, we've got the Olympic Games coming up, July 23rd in Tokyo. And of course, it's a very different event, being staged very differently. The organisers have very different ideas. No fans there, of course. But I'm sure they'll be having a close eye on events here at the Euros to see how the events take place. Back to you, Robin.
Rahul Pathak, thanks very much.
Finally, the heartwarming tale of two relatives who've been reunited more than 1,000 years after they died. The family reunion at Denmark's National Museum brought together the skeletons of two Viking warriors whose DNA shows they were closely related. One died in Denmark in his 50s, while his younger relative has been brought to the museum from the UK. His remains are among 35 skeletons found in 2008 in the grounds of an Oxford college. It's thought they were victims of the mass killing of Danes ordered by King Ethelred in the year 1002 AD in response to Viking raids.
You almost never find skeletons that are relatives. As an archaeologist, you have no clue if the skeleton that you are excavating has any family members. But new DNA technology and research are making it possible to discover if two skeletons are relatives. And this is a big discovery.
The headlines again. G7 leaders have begun their summit in the UK, with vaccines, girls' education and climate topping the agenda.
Cross-border travel restrictions will be relaxed across Europe, allowing people to head off for summer holidays.
And Europe's biggest football tournament is just hours away, kicking off after a one-year delay.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.